just take one example of land to start focusing on these things. So in English, again, you can say land and in economics as a factor of production until you start looking at the word land, or even at the definition economists will give, which is land can have kind of physical dimensions and ephemeral dimensions. We don't necessarily mean only the physical. Nobody makes the effort to say this in the economics class, but if you dig down, that is always understood. Land is a concept which goes from the physical to the ephemeral. But if I talk about land in English, if the concept goes from the physical to the ephemeral, as let's say, so I'm not saying there's anything beyond the ephemeral. I'm just saying, you know, we have hard stuff, we have light stuff, we have hard science, we have soft science. So I'm just staying within the convenience of modern thinking. We say that, but then we quickly prefer all the hard ones. So we might say as economists, land has this wide range of interpretation, but the easier one to work with is one that looks like mechanics, physics, and so on. So we just stay there. And then we pretend the other one's not there, but it's not true. And so if you take the word land in the English language, for example, before economists speak, you can take, so what land do you live in? Well, I live in England, right? You live in Israel. So land in this sense, what does it mean? It's a kind of country, it's a place, you know, this is a meaning of land. Also in German, a land is like a state or a county in a country. Then you can say in English, I own a very large piece of land in Scotland, where you're referring to a demise, an area of land, demise to you. You own it, nobody else can come on it because you bought it or you inherited it. So you have exclusive right of use of this area of Scotland or England or wherever it might be. And this is another sense of land. This is my land, not my land in the sense of England is my land, but land in the sense of the estate I own, and so on. And then you can say land as a means of production in the sense the land to a farmer is his means of production. That's how he's going to produce stuff. So that's another meaning of land. It's still not physical necessarily. And then when you really get into it, you can talk about the topsoil on a farm. And in law and in fact, on any farm, you go down a couple of spits or whatever it might be. This is really your farmland. It's the soil, the fertility of which you're either going to maintain, increase, or make better. That's your job as a farmer. Below there is the subsoil. And in many countries, and certainly in this country, the subsoil does not belong to you can own the topsoil, but you don't get the subsoil with this. Underneath there is oil and gold and all sorts of things we're going to mine. And in most countries, that your ownership doesn't go down that deep. Somehow, if you find oil on your land, that's not going to be your oil. You know, you can make it your oil by legislation if you want, but somehow there's a sense when you find oil under your land, this is not just yours. Maybe not the case in Texas, but here it is. Or if you find gold coins from the Roman era, these are not yours. This is treasure trove. And even where I live, I live in a street, and if you go halfway across the street, there's an invisible legal line. And everything under the street on my side of the line belongs to me, and on the other side belongs to my neighbor. But below that street is the land on which the street has been built. This is not mine, right? So you often find when you go legally into the land I own, I'm only owning the top bit. And down here, I'm in it's this human resources, you know, mining and I don't know what. You can say the same thing with the sea, except land doesn't apply. You know, who gets to say where Norway owns the North Sea and where England does? You know, because way out beyond the 12-mile limit is where the oil is. So somehow we've made a deal that this bit of oil belongs to Norway and that bit belongs to England, and Israel's getting none of it. You see what I mean? So we just use these notions to divide up the land as if it's something hard, but in fact it's ephemeral. So I think in all economics, and especially in land, you have to be very careful. What do you think economists mean when they say land? And I think they're undecided. They have this wide scope, but they rest. The comfort zone is when we talk about something physical. But in fact, I don't think it works in economics to talk about land as something physical, because it, if you look at the, say, farmland, it's the topsoil which is yours. If you're lucky, we can put that on your balance sheet, and you can sell the topsoil on, even if land has no value, right? The topsoil does. So we're already in a big area. I would say the topsoil of a farm, so to speak, belongs to the farmer and should have a value. It's almost a measure of fertility. How was it when I came? What's it like when I left? This has some kind of value. I'm not saying how you can express it in financial terms, but that's what the farmer can do. Below that, he can do nothing anyway. It's subsoil. There's no point to doing anything to it. And you find very quickly this is all our land down here somehow, right? And all we've done is we've just written on a map, you get the topsoil inside this area, but underneath that, there's no border. And you can put a hedge around a field and you can have carrots on this side and sheep in that side. But when you go down the subsoil, you can't divide the rocks conveniently into nice, your rock is going to go underneath everything. And it won't be divided vertically because of some legal concept coming from above. So even to understand land in economic terms, I would say it starts to make sense when you say the bit of land that we can take hold of and change, like the topsoil or the tree that's going to become a chair. When Steiner says labor is taking hold of nature, this you can start to see what he means by land, or by Natur, I would say. But economics will also get that if you had a more sophisticated understanding of economics in English. It's like, say you've got the right to chop the tree down. You've got the right to the topsoil, but down below the subsoil, you don't. And it's not difficult to say subsoil has no value. If you say land has no value, you've got a problem on your hands because topsoil clearly has a value. So if you say land, meaning subsoil and deeper, has no value, then this is not really so complicated to understand. You will ask, say, yeah, but what if I found oil or treasure trove, or petrified remains, or I don't know what's in the subsoil? I think people will say, okay, but that's not the land, that's not the subsoil, it's not the rock formation. That's some artifact, or something which is not yours, is ours, and we have to come to some sort of deal. I think this is just general. So I think in this way you can come to some understanding. Also, it would help normal economics when it says land, if it got very clear what it's understanding by this single expression, because then you can then see, I think, where you can arrive at more experientially the fact that it has no value. Or put it another way, it belongs to all of us. So there's no way you're going to sell me a bit of it. This isn't the way Steiner comes to it. But if I think of my discussions with real estate people, or the kind of real world of these kind of people, I think you can come to the idea that once we get to an understanding that all this is ours, it has no market by definition. If you can say the subsoil is yours, and I can agree with you, now we've got a market, or at least we've got some problem. But once we agree it's ours, there is no market, and therefore there's no commodity. So in a way, it's dropped out of the economy. And here I think it's very important in Steiner's world, or his way of speaking. He has this other concept, just to make it clearer or more complicated, that the economic life, or the economic process he describes, takes place between what he calls Natur, which is on the he has this image, here's the infrared. So I've already used Goethe's color theory. Now he gets more complicated because he says in the next lecture, or maybe in the same lecture, so here's the economic process, and it takes place between two boundaries. One is the infrared, and when you look through the infrared, you see Natur, you see land. If you, on this side, you have ultraviolet, and when you look to the ultraviolet, you have spirit or capital. So these are very powerful concepts, that what he calls the economy is within or between this realm of capital, which does not exist in economic life. It comes through the ultraviolet, but it doesn't originate here, it comes in here. And nature, which comes through the infrared, but doesn't begin in the economic process. So neither of these things belong in it. Without them, there wouldn't be an economic process, there'd be no context. But they're not part of the context. These cannot be turned into commodities. And when you have these ideas, at least from my reading, again, from a normal point of view, if I subject Steiner to huge scrutiny, not the, let's say, the light scrutiny that someone who already likes Steiner was subjected to, but someone who has a big problem with him, but who is willing to scrutinize him and not just say, get rid of the guy, right? If you allow him to be really scrutinized, this is what I'm kind of trying to do on his behalf. What is really what he's saying? And I think in this way, you come to the things he's pointing to, albeit by a different path. And this idea that infrared and ultraviolet, these are examples from physics. You know, he knows what he's doing. He uses physics to defeat the illusion people want to make, right? and so this, I think, is very important, that between these two realms of light, the economic process takes place. It doesn't include them, and it doesn't go outside them. So if one could just have that thought and live with that thought, and not push it away too quickly, then I think it's very ordering. But the thought leads you to the fact that inside here, we can have commodities and nothing else, but outside there are no commodities. Which again is not saying there are no commodities in the world. It's saying economics is only about commodities, but be careful not to think that everything is a commodity. It's perfectly thinkable if you pay attention. Just, you know, it's perfectly valid, rational to say the economic process includes commodities and nothing else, but not everything is a commodity. Therefore, it's not inside the economic process. This is a perfectly reasonable statement. It's logical, it's rational, right? And so I'm not saying anything which offends your consciousness or your normal understanding or your rationality or everything else we claim we are, right? Especially economists. I'm just saying check your own reasoning, right? And you will be led ineluctably to this fact that if it's true, we just need to become clear what belongs inside and what belongs outside the economic process. And we will come upon what he then describes. And none of this he says.
So once you say the transformed land, like the upper side of the soil, can be treated as a commodity in the sense that it is transformed and it's not the undersurface, then can't an economist come and say, okay, that's what I'm always talking about when I say land, even a house, even not in production, not in the production side of things, but in the housing side of things, it's transformed land. Therefore, I'm always talking, whether it being a house, an apartment, or a farm, or a place to chop wood. I'm always, when I say land, I always talk about the transformed thing, and therefore there's no problem. How he would say, how does what you say about land not being a commodity influence me?
Oh, I think that's easy. I begin with real estate, you know, because that's where you see it very clearly. If you buy a house, if anyone buys a house, at least in the world which accepts land has a value, it's not exactly what they're doing. Because when you, especially if you build a house, you start with a piece of land, which is a demised area of the earth, demised to you. So it's a legal construct. It's not land as such in that sense. And ideally it has no topsoil. So there's no, all you can do is build on it. See what I mean? It has no value other than the fact you can build on it. Well, then you have and then when you do the economics, it goes back to what the market will bear. You have the historical cost of let's whatever the land cost, it costs you this, and now you have the cost of the bricks, the labor, everything else which results in a house, right? All that is directly costable and goes on your. You can say it goes through your expense account, but it arrives as equals my house, which goes on the balance sheet at the cost it was to me. This is the historical cost of my house. It cost me 100,000 materials and labor, and that's what I paid for my house, plus the land underneath it. And now you can see very easily, and what everyone's assuming is that the value of the house goes up and up and up. That's what everyone thinks. It goes with the territory of thinking land has value. You think it's going up forever. These are undisconnectable thoughts. So now we're in this world, okay. And so many people, they don't buy a house in order to live in it. They buy a house in order to live in an asset which they put in permanent play. This was never the case before. You bought a house and you're going to live there forever. But not today. You buy a house to have an asset, your most important asset, right? And you're living in an asset which is in permanent play. So if someone came along, in an inflationary period, and your house cost you 100, but now someone says it's worth 250,000 to me. If you were free of all other consideration, you probably say, okay, let's sell it, darling. Let's move out of here, and we make it, and now we can go and we can buy another one, and we can keep this game going. So most people play this game, but if you look at it economically, the house which they build is a constant cost to them. And physically, it's depreciating all the time, not at the 25% we put on automobiles, but at maybe 5% or 2%, but physically it is deteriorating. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a maintenance bill. So it's not true to say that value of the house went up. The value of the house went down. In fact, if you had to sell that house and try and sell it with the paint not properly kept up and so on, people would push the price down. So that's not the issue. What's going on is I bought the land at this price, and because of where I put the house, and whether I made it face the sun, all sorts of things I did with my bricks. I can put my bricks so they all face north in a northern hemisphere, and that would be okay if I'm an artist, but not if I want to get a suntan. So normally you orientate your house towards the sun, and if it's where I am, you orientate it southeast, not direct south. There's a little detail, because that's where you maximize the value. Too much sun is going to push the value down. So these are details. So it's the same bricks and mortar, the same labor, right? But whether I put it this way or this way changes the value. If I live by the sea. The closer you get to the ocean, where you can see the sea, the more people pay to live there, obviously. But that doesn't stop your bricks getting older or your paint getting worse. It just puts up the amount someone will pay for your house, meaning the house plus the land underneath it. So it's the value of land has gone up and up and up. Not the value of the house is going down and down and down. In fact, so it's easy to show this in real estate terms. People don't want to get into it, but it's ineluctable. And so you come to the question. I live in somewhere where my son lives in an apartment facing the sea, and there's a big developer in town. He's about to build a block of apartments in front of my son's apartment because he bought the beach. So my son's apartment next year it will be a lot less worth because he would just be looking out on a wall instead of onto the ocean. So you get into the value is affected by enjoyment factor. Also, everything's ephemeral, right? When you come to why I pay more than this, right? And all this is having an effect, but it's very easy to say, okay, the value of the land is here, the cost of your house is here. We put these together, and we can consolidate these and say one thing: the house is worth so much. But in reality, it's not true, and you can just do it balance sheet by balance sheet. So you can identify the thing that's causing the value or causing the increase in the market is not the cost of the house. It's the fact that people will pour money into what they think is land. Okay, so as long as they think that, they will do it. But if Steiner says if that's a misdescription, if it has no value, all that's going to do is just drag so much cash into an unreality, you won't have any money to spend. That's a good way of explaining inflation, right? So it becomes kind of existential or ephemeral in this sense. I'm just making a kind of financial argument, right? I'm not saying don't think land has the value. I'm saying if you think it has the value, be very careful, because this will have a consequence. It will result in the value of land going up and up and up. There will be no money to buy things with. Then you can see that all over the world. And so it's a kind of financial. So what I say, I'm just giving you serious financial advice. I'm not doing a moral number on. You can ignore me if you like, right? But history is on my side. In fact, this is why we have the problems we have, and it's existential. More and more all over the world, the cost of land is removing disposable income from the world, so people in the end can't afford to rent. And so when you get in a situation where people cannot afford to rent your property or buy it as a developer, you know you've hit the barriers, and the first thing comes down is not the value of the house, the bricks and mortar. You drop the value of the land. It's the first thing you do. You get rid of this fake. You can say you drop the value, you're just getting rid of some of fake value in your calculation. And if you want to get ahead of the process, you take that fake value down to zero, and you build your economy on the true value, which is zero. And you say, thank God someone's willing to pay the extra, the way I speak. And then if you're really savvy, you would use that extra to give it away. Then you can get a much more complicated thing, how you can use the discrepancy between those who think land has a value and those who think it doesn't, to free up a huge amount of capital to invest in people. I call this a land and capital exchange. And I live in a case where this is happening in this town I live in. So it gets very complicated very quickly, but in fact, the sophistication of the argument I'm making is very close to the reality if you come in strict financial analysis terms. And then people say, oh, so that's tomorrow's story. And I say, yes. And it's up to you whether you want to gamble that you'll get away with today's story until you can't, or whether you want to become tomorrow's story and you give yourself a soft landing. Because everybody currently is relying on this to go up and up and up. And they'll be on a chair when the music stops. But, this is just gambling gone mad. So I'm not apologizing for speaking quite complicatedly about this, because I'm trying to get my listener to enter into this in his own circumstance. How do you treat economically your own house that you're living in? Aren't you actually thinking, thank God the land has this value, it's going up and up and up, no thanks to me? And aren't you going to cash out when you think you're near the top of the market? Who is not thinking like that, really, right?
Yeah.
And you're thinking the market will not impact on you. It will impact everybody else, but not you. This is what, you're going to leave the table just before the market crashes. Well, good luck, right? Everybody is thinking like that if they made it conscious, their motivation, right? And this is what I appeal to, because if they're not up for this, they won't get how Steiner's helping us get a soft landing at this point in time. He's not fighting to be the best economist. He's just trying to see if we understand the situation, this is the only way we're going to kind of get out of the mess we've got into. Really, it's a huge service that he's offering.